Hello, welcome back, my friends, to Student Affairs Live, the weekly web show for student affairs professionals in higher education. I'm your host, Tony Duty. I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers State University, New Jersey. If you couldn't tell, I am more than just a little bit excited about our rock star lineup today. In a moment, I'll introduce you to my guests, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. Higher Ed Live is sponsored and produced by M. Stoner, a marketing communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Student Affairs Live is exclusively sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA publishes the Journal of College Student Development and About Campus. Join us in Tampa for our annual convention by clicking on the link we're tweeting out now. I'd also like to take a moment this holiday season to express my sincere gratitude to you, the viewers, across the nation for taking the time to help develop, improve, and take part in these conversations throughout the year. Special thanks to my co-host, Heather Shea Gasser, for being such a great friend and for always finding a few minutes for me to listen, laugh, strategize, and bat around a few ideas. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network, and you can tune in to Student Affairs Live every other Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. You can join the conversation today on Twitter using the Higher Ed Live hashtag, and I'm pleased to have lending a hand Rutgers' very own Twitter-stastic superstar. I dare you to say that 3 times fast. Twitter-stastic superstar. Robin Janice monitoring today's back channel. Finally, I am pleased to have joined me today what I consider to be rock stars of digital leadership. For those viewing the show, full biographies of our guests are on the Higher Ed Live website. Julie, Eric, Ken, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for months now. Could you all please take a brief moment and share your title or your role and the superhero or movie character that would best describe your social media presence and why? Anyone?
Hey, well, I'm Ken Elmore. I'm the Dean of Students here at Boston University, and I think to answer that, 2 things come to mind. So there's this show that I watch on the Esquire network called The Weekend Fix, and it's a really neat show where these 2 guys are going all over, these 2 celebrities go all over the place, over a city, and they use social media to get themselves around. But if you really want a character, I'm thinking Kim Possible from the cartoons.
Nice.
Cool. Julie?
So yeah, this is Julie Van Kirchmeyer, Assistant Vice President for Student Auxiliary Services here at Northwestern University. And I kind of went back and forth on this for a little bit, but I'm a little more old school when it comes to my TV watching, so we're going to go with the show The West Wing, and we're going to go with C.J. Craig. She's kind of out there, direct, she's who she is, and I like to think that I'm well-versed, so we'll go with that.
Nice, I like it. All right, Eric.
And I was blessed. My parents were digital pioneers, so I've got the name Equalman. It's just my first initial last name. So I've actually, this is a great question. I'm glad I wore the shirt. So, anyways, but I hope I'm more Superman. But what I have found in my Twitter feeds is that a lot of people like this cartoon, not cartoon, but superhero from Doug called Quail Man, which is right next to my name, Qual Man. And if you ever Google images, it's not very flattering. So anyways, I think that was a funny thing that a lot of people type in Quail Man the wrong way and type in my last name.
Did you just say flaw-attering?
I might have. I meant to say it's unflattering or not very flattering. If unflattering is even a word. Not flattering. Yeah, I did say unflattering. That's not even a word.
Yep.
I love it. All right, so we're going to get started. I know there's a lot of questions out there in the Twitterverse. Eric, you literally wrote the book on digital leadership. How do you define it?
You know, I think the best ideas are simple ones, and so all digital leadership to me is for individuals to go about leading their best life, achieving their best leadership, and then leaving a legacy that matters, starting 5 seconds. When I say legacy, it's not 50 years from now. I'm talking 5 seconds from today, 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years, 50 years, 500 years. And so that's really, in my mind, it's really the 3 L's. It's about your best life, best leadership, and then your best legacy.
Excellent. So, you know, we all got our start differently in social media in different ways. I'm curious as to the story of how each of you got started. Was there a triggering motivation? And did you dip your toe in and quietly kind of look in from the outside, or did you just go full in and commit right from the start?
I know for me, I don't do anything by dipping my toe in any water. I think anybody that knows me knows it's head first or nothing. But I sort of kind of grew up as a professional as social media was starting to take off. And so the first thing I really vividly remember is when Facebook started to gain traction on college campuses outside of Harvard. And we started to hear about it on campus, and the administration immediately was scared of it. And so I said, wait a minute, let's dig into this a little bit more, and myself and another colleague, Lori Berry at the University of Southern Indiana, dug into it and did a presentation for our division on it and said, this is really what it is, this is how students are using it, and then we thought maybe we better use it too. It says back then you had to have the EDU address. We could do it. The next thing for me was actually, it was Twitter at NASPA. And folks through the SA Chat hashtag were encouraging people to tweet, and I sat next to somebody who did it, and they logged me on right there, and I started to go. And from then, it's been an integral part of my professional identity.
And I met Julie through NASPA and Twitter as well. I was one of those people, too, who stumbled upon this world and actually figured, why not just stumble in? Let's go full on. You know, for me, it was about trying to engage our student population in the event that I needed to communicate with them really quickly. And this was one of those things back in 2008 that was really starting to take off outside of the Harvard sphere. And being so close to it, we decided to start checking it out and starting to, and that's where we got to this.
And then mine was similar. I was in the right place, right time. I was in Cambridge, so I was sitting right there and just saw the potential of this. And what got me excited, I've always been a digital guy, but what got me excited was the relationship piece. It was less about technology and it was all about the relationships. So I went full in, and people at the time were saying, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're killing your credibility on search engine marketing. You're talking about this teenage stuff. What are you doing? And you know, I had a position at a head of marketing at a company, and they're going, what are you doing? And so fortunately it panned out okay, but I remember at the time people were saying, you're going on the wrong path here. This is just for teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings up a good point. There are lots of reasons why folks choose not to engage in social media, and people say there's not enough time, it's too risky, or the learning curve is too great. How do each of you navigate those particular and other issues when people say, this isn't for me?
Well, I try to make sure that I find a way for people to see that this can be actually a place where we can solve problems. I like to think about this world as being another public space. And, you know, there's this reality. We carry our public space with us all the time. And if everyone's carrying their public space, why not be a part of it? And there are a lot of things that you can get in a social media world that you can get in life, right? There are interactions, there's serendipitousness, there are a lot of bad things too, and I think we just focus too much on the bad stuff. We're too worried about really having a conversation because there's a level of permanency when we can physically see it. But I think people really got to move away from that. And what's more, I appreciate that Eric said, yeah, I stuck with it even though people said it was for the young people. Well, look, if you're in higher education, you're always about the young people, so it better always be about a 16-year-old. I know one of the things I do with my 16-year-old is I get her around the table with some of her friends periodically, and I just start to ask them what sorts of things they're using. The 16-year-olds of the world are going to be my students in a few years, so it better be about the teenagers.
I think it's an interesting point you just made there, Ken, about, you know, focusing on that generation, because that really is the work that we do, and these are the folks coming in. I mean, we do it in a number of different environments already. We do it when we start looking at facility design, food programs, and event planning. Why on earth would we not do it when it comes to this tangible communication, network, and connection tool?
And I always like to look, those are great points, and I always like to look at some examples that are out there. Just looking 4 or 5 years ago, I remember when Twitter and Twitter in particular was becoming big, that ESPN told their on-air talent, we don't really want you on Twitter, but if you're on Twitter, don't talk about sports. And I started laughing when I heard that. I go, I wonder how long it's going to take them until they see the light. And fortunately for them, they saw it within about 6 to 12 months, and they reversed that policy, understanding that that's the way that they develop those relationships with their listening base. Whether you're Scott Van Pelt, Ryan Russillo, or Mike Greenberg is this on-air talent, that's how you develop those relationships. So you can play that kind of out in front of an audience, and they go, oh, yeah, of course, I can laugh at ESPN, but I'm doing the exact same thing. So most people have seen the light. They understand we don't have a choice on whether we do social and mobile. It's how well we do it.
Mm-hmm. So a quick
we talk so much in higher education about assessment nowadays. We're assessing this, we're assessing that. Well, look, this is another tool for assessment. This is where you can try and use all the information you've got. And there's a lot to observe with how your students, how young people are using the net, what they're writing about, subject matter. I mean, this is just one more piece that we've got to be able to corral. I don't have the luxury in student affairs of having a nice, neat way to put numbers down about verve and ambition and fear and esprit de corps, and this is a way that you can get a sense of that. And I think the more you can do to say to that person who's fearful about it that this is what you can get out of it for sure. I also think that what you've got to do too is address people's concerns. There's some real ethical concerns with this, but there are ethical concerns with just about everything. The primary one, my guess, is for the old heads, thinking about how you conceptualize and maybe even reconceptualize what privacy means. And I think where you can address that for people, where you can address the trust issues that people have, it might be helpful to get more people engaged in what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, too, about the privacy component, I think the other thing that I find myself explaining to folks who are hesitant is that they also in the same breath or in the same conversation will say they want to be accessible to students, and this is a beautiful way to be directly accessible to your students and connect with them tangibly without going to 500 different meetings across campus. So if you start to look at the time exchange, this is far more efficient than, it doesn't take the place of these meetings, but I think it can certainly augment them quite successfully.
So Julie, you talk about some of the tangible benefits of using it. I know there are leaders who are always measuring the return on investment of engaging in social media. What are some of the other advantages that you might have over peers or colleagues who might not embrace these digital tools?
Well, I think that I hit on a big one, and that's being accessible. If you take it down just to the role that I have on campus, this particular role, it's very easy to become back of house, because we're dealing with a lot of administrative issues and facility planning, and you're not up in front of students all the time. I am in contact more with students online. I am in contact more with students via Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all the other social media outlets that I can get my hands on, because it keeps me real and relevant with them. And I get everything from maintenance requests on Twitter to, hey, how are you doing, to somebody gets a card that we sent them and they take a picture of it and they post it online. And so, it just really changes the dynamic that I have with the students that we're serving. It helps you remain relevant. I think it helps you remain visible. It helps establish those connections in a very real way. And, institutionally, think about the brand that you're putting out there. So as an individual, I get all these benefits. I also get networking benefits and connections for me professionally. But if you do this as an institution and as a division, you get to broadcast your brand. You get to share who you are directly with the students. There is no filter. And that's powerful to me.
And you talk about this concept of return on investment. I mean, put return on investment aside. I like to ask people, well, return for what, right? And Julie just said it right there. Problem solving is a return on investment. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Telling stories, that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we do as institutions. So we've got to think about it a little bit differently and make people understand that this is not just a dollars and cents thing. And by the way, it doesn't cost a lot, but it's it's one of those things where you've just got to get people to rethink it. We've got to stop using business terms like that and think that that's what this is really about, because that's going to keep the conversation focused that way. We've got to talk about real heart kinds of issues, and how that works. And problem solving, storytelling are about heart.
I love that. That's good.
So go ahead, Eric.
Julie and Ken are talking about is that I love Gary Vaynerchuk's quote, really in line with what Ken was saying, is that, you know, that's like asking what's the return on investment of your mother. And what Julie was mentioning, when I've been able to, fortunate to actually engage with a lot of the top folks in higher ed, like Ken and Julie, is that when they're faced with, some of these decisions are hard, right? Some of these processes and decisions are hard, but when you just put the student first, as Julie mentioned, then it makes really a lot of the decisions and your actions a lot easier. And so how can you help those students as best as possible? And I've been fortunate to see it firsthand, where I've been really honored, whether it's Rutgers, Northwestern, where universities are using my books. And now in this day and age, via Skype, Google Hangouts, I can Skype into the class. I've done it 4 times this week. And now I have a direct relationship with that professor and also with those students. And so if you're not using these tools at a university, that university is getting further and further ahead of you, because they're getting direct contact with the folks that they're learning from.
So I wanted to move into this concept of leadership and authenticity. I actually pulled some recent tweets from each of you, and I read them to some students and asked them to give me an evaluation of your personality and your values without actually knowing anything else about you other than the tweets that you had. So
are these psychology majors?
What's that?
Are these psychology majors, and I'm going to get nervous.
All right, so here's the first one. Let's see if you can claim your own description. So the students read this person's tweets and thought that their personality was chill, reflective, fun, accessible, and caring, and that they valued justice, coolness, safety, student success, and arts and culture. Anyone want to raise a hand for that one?
I'm raising my hand. That's probably me.
That sounds like you.
That is definitely Ken. All right,
I want that one, though. Can I have that one?
All right, so the next one. Students read this person's tweets and thought that their personality was curious, fun, gracious, and that they valued leadership, people, data, statistics, and education. Anyone want to claim that one?
Can I point to the box to my left? Because that's probably not me.
I'll go with Julie on that one.
No, it was you, Eric. It was
Okay.
very common. All right.
Thank
and then
you.
the last one is students read this person's and they thought their personality was witty, sharp, real, positive, proud, and that they valued wellness, activism, justice, and positive change. So yes, that's
Left over, so it's got to be me.
That's right. You're the only one left. So I'm going to start with Ken, because I've heard you talk about this concept before, Ken, of authenticity. Can you talk about what those words mean to you online? Because these are words that are describing what you've written on Twitter, but is that really Ken Elmore?
Well, you know, I think it's more about being genuine, right? It's hard being authentic. I mean, I'm a different person than I might be in my office space, than I might be in a different public space, but I try to always be genuine. There are just some aspects about me, about how I think, about how I interact, that bleed into my tweets, my blog posts, and I try to keep those places the places where I'm most genuine. You know, my authentic self is probably more what my family sees. It's probably more personal, and so I try to keep my authenticity separate from my genuineness, because I just have a lot of roles to play, and if I were always my authentic self, I'm just not sure I could be really effective in public. But if I can stay genuine to what I value, how I act, how I interact with people, then that works, I think, most of the time.
Anyone else?
I would agree with that distinction between authenticity and genuineness, and quite frankly, hadn't really thought about that till now, and listening to Ken explain it, that makes a lot of sense to me. I made the decision a long time ago to not have separate professional and personal accounts. because I felt like one would be far too antiseptic and just too overly professional. And if one of the intentions I had with using social media was to be connected to our students, it's kind of hard to be connected to somebody who's just speaking bullet points from the, the talking point guide for the university. And so it's touching for me to know that when you read that out to your students, that one of the things they came back with for me is that I was real. It's a real person. And I think for me, when you talk about authenticity, or in Ken's case, reframing that to be genuine, it's how do students perceive you? How do people perceive you? My colleagues perceive me. And if they perceive me as real, then that's fantastic.
I do like that reframing, because if you look at it, it's tricky. If you look at Twitter, when I talk with companies and universities, I want to be personal, so I'm sprinkling personal stuff. So maybe I'm super excited about Michigan State basketball or something like that. But other times I've learned over time that people don't want to hear about my view on politics, or they don't want to hear about my view on XYZ. So it's not necessarily my 360 ethos that's out there. It's actually, what do people want to hear from me? And so to Ken's point, is that it might not be my whole self, but I like that genuine piece. That makes sense, is that you're not going to blast everything with every thought that you have about every topic. It's what do people want to hear from you about which subject matter. And so I've learned that over time.
Yeah, I think we've all made some interesting missteps probably in the realms of social media before to help us define what that distinction might be.
Once I had this terrible misstep where I was I'm sure you've never done this, but I thought I was texting, and instead I was tweeting, and that could have been, it was almost a disaster. I'm glad I still have a job.
Yeah, that's what stuck in my head last time I saw you, Ken. You said if I was my authentic self, I would probably be fired.
Probably.
So that leads to another important question. There's so many troubling world events and campus tragedies over the last few months and years, or weeks and days. Can you recall a moment when you really struggled to find the words to compose a message? And to Eric's point, how do you deal with some topics that might be considered taboo, sensitive, or potentially political?
I mean, on that front, is it sometimes I just ask myself, if something like that happens, I guess a good one, I was in Boston during the Boston, I was living in Boston during the Boston bombings. And I happened to be in Berlin. I happened to fly out a day ahead of time because I'd never been to Berlin. And so since I flew out a day ahead of time, my kids and my wife flew down to Miami, where her parents are. And so it's just a really lucky situation, because we always stood where that bomb occurred. Now, I don't know if we would have been there at that time of day due to nap time, but there's conceivable at least myself and my older daughter could have been there. So I thought, is this something that I should post on? And it just was in my being genuine. It was in my heart that from Berlin I just wrote a blog post about what it made me feel like being across the world when this occurred. And I think that's what you have to ask yourself is, by writing this or posting this, is it going to help at least one person? If it does, then go for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are many times I've struggled to find the words, and sometimes have probably put stuff out there in the Twitterverse that I shouldn't have upon reflection, because it was an overly emotional moment. I can think back to, this will come as a shock to everybody that knows me, but I'm an ardent feminist. I know you're all so surprised. But one of the things that I remember vividly is when the Lilly Ledbetter decision happened, and I was incredibly frustrated, and I put out a tweet that was probably less than not inappropriate. No one would read it and say, oh my gosh, she's off her rocker, but it certainly caused some responses that maybe could have been, I could have introduced it in a way that would have created more dialogue instead of being so divisive. And so lesson learned for me, but negotiating that space between who you are and what you believe, and then what responsibility you have to represent not just your institution, but an appropriate perspective to encourage positive dialogue about things. That's a tough one to negotiate, and sometimes I think I do it really well, and sometimes I miss, and we learn every time.
And following on that, Julie, I mean, one of the things that I often do is just go radio silent for a while. Yeah. Sometimes I like to do that just as a show of respect. The last few weeks, for example, with things that we've seen in Cleveland and Missouri and New York, I've been kind of quiet on that. I don't want to. I fear over-sensationalizing sometimes, and also understating as well. And I try to do respect by just going radio silent. And then, in moments like the Boston bombings, I had to play a really different role all of a sudden. And so for me, it meant that to deal with that situation, I almost had to have this virtual eye contact with people. I had to be able to look people in the eye virtually and be able to say, hey, it's going to be okay, and I got some information for you that might help you in terms of that. And at the same time, too, people needed a little psychic refreshment, too, and that's important to be able to do that. So I had to take a very different role. It had to be very measured, and it needed to be in one of those spaces where people would at least look at what I had to say when I said it. But the eye contact, the virtual eye contact is really important, and the respect is really important too.
No, that's good.
Oh, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
I'm going to ask you, Ken and Julie, a question, actually, because it's fascinating to me. I think it's sort of related to what we were just chatting about. But when you look at, like, Oreo cookies, they go out on Gay Pride Day and they post out on Facebook an image of a rainbow cookie. Very risky, right? And it's very controversial. Everyone said, we're not buying Oreos anymore. We don't need to hear your political thoughts on X, Y, and Z. But it turns out it was actually a boon for them. They went from 25,000 followers on Facebook a day to 50,000 followers on Facebook a day by taking a hard stance on a controversial, somewhat controversial subject. What I want to ask you from a higher ed perspective, do you see any universities out there that are very progressive in that sense? Like the Oreo cookie, they're kind of getting out there when it's somewhat of a risky play for the university. Do you guys see any out there that you really look to?
That's a really good question, Eric. For me, I don't know that I see it as much in the social media realm. I see it more through the actions and the activities that are happening on campuses and how those relate to their mission. And a very recent example, Union Theological Seminary and the support spaces they have put together for protesters in the New York area. Just how to do this safely, what to do if you're arrested. There's hot chocolate and water and food and things available for you. They're not saying this, that, or the other, although with their mission they're pretty firm about what they believe, but they're providing that support and that space for people to express their opinions and be open about who they are and to champion their own points of view. And in higher education, that's, I think, seminal to our mission. And so you take that into the social media sphere, and that's when I get back to things like what I put out there needs to be something that encourages that kind of activity, not shuts it down. So that's me. I would say that's the university. I would say that's anybody affiliated in higher ed.
I tend to see the see it through individuals in higher education. Our institutions are big, slow-moving, super deliberate institutions that tend not to want to put out statements as much as they want to be able to help, right? And to provide the education for the next set of prosecutors or police officers, or to be available for the doctors and the support like Union is doing. So I tend to look to the individuals for those sorts of things, individuals at institutions. I almost feel like I try to set up, and I appreciate people who follow me understanding this, whether it be in any social media platform, that people understand that there's got to be a level of play where I can, at times, point to an opinion without people taking it as necessarily the institution's opinion. And it's almost fair to say, well, I've got this in this open space that's a bit more social, and it's okay to do it. And I think there's a tacit agreement with that. It's funny, I think that if I sent an email, people tend to look at an email as being an official channel, and they tend to say that there's a little bit more play in social media with some of the things that I put out there. And so I like to keep that agreement with people and hope that it can hold.
Yeah. And I think you and Julie are doing a fantastic job of pushing that envelope on the individual side. So thank you, and keep doing that, because we're seeing that change on a daily basis. So thank you for being the pioneers.
So I want to take a question that was submitted through the Higher Ed Live website from Matthew Ferguson. He states, the anonymity of social media platforms, especially as demonstrated on sites like Reddit, can lead to great conversations and discourse as it provides a virtually safe environment for a variety of opinions. While anonymity can be great for introverts or minority opinions, it can also be a breeding ground for negativity. Can any of you discuss a time that you were virtually heckled by a troll, and what did you do to diffuse the negativity? And what can we learn from this experience if we encounter trolls with personal or organizational accounts?
Well, I feel like it's always out there. I get it plenty. I have a firm belief. Here's my value. I just believe in free speech to the nth degree, free speech to infinity, and I hope that anyone who's looking at comments or looking at the sorts of things that someone who's trolling might do is able to make their own opinion and make their own decision about it. Can it be hurtful? Of course, but I just think that the ability to have this expressive media and this emerging media that opens up for people to express themselves is so important and far outweighs the value of the trolls in what we try to do. That I just got to go with it and go for it. It's an important piece. We've set this medium up where your credibility is about your respect for free speech, and with the exception of absolute free speech where we're threatening each other, I think we got to do that. I mean, you think about American culture and American history. We've actually done well over history by the anonymous post, the Revolutionary War, the Federalist Papers. Those were anonymous posts. So I think we've done well by that. That's a basic American value, and it's one that I pretty much hold very dear to. You know where you're going, and you know what you're getting into when you get into the social media, and we just have got to take the good with the bad.
I think it also differs based on your medium. So Twitter's fast, and you may put something out on Twitter, and somebody responds to it, and you may decide to get into a back and forth for a little bit, and then you're done. I think Facebook has a little bit more ability to have a little longer dialogue sometimes. I had a really long one with some folks after one of the decisions of the grand juries, and took it as an opportunity to dialogue about the issue of white privilege in a way that folks felt safe enough to talk about it, and they were bringing up some controversial things. That was powerful. And then blogs, I think you really have the ability to express a maybe well more thought out point of view, challenge folks, and then you can engage in the comments. So can you strategically use those in manners that help you make those points and create those environments? I think you can. I think there does come a point, though, when we're talking about trolls or hecklers where it can become so negative and detract so much from what you're trying to accomplish. I am so not afraid to block or unfollow. I mean, at what point does it become so detrimental to others who are there and in that space with you? And I think that kind of gets to that line, kind of you talking about free speech and then absolute free speech, because we've gotten some that have gone to the point where they truly are threatening.
Yeah. And that's what's facing the Supreme Court right now, is that if there's a threat by a social, I'm going to harm my professor, can you take action to try to reduce that? And so that's just in the Supreme Court's hands right now. I think there's that fine line, and we'll hopefully come to a happy medium. But in terms of me, for trolls, I define a troll really as someone that didn't buy my product or isn't even affiliated with the university, or they're just mad at the world. So they're taking that message board and trying to take it over. And so it's up to you to allow them to not take it over. But it's in our nature to focus on the negative as individuals, as institutions. And so it's important to kind of understand, and this is a qualitative field, that you start to, and they're trying to develop tools so you can identify this person's a troll. They've been negative on 6 sites before you. It's not your issue, it's that person's issue. And try to help that person out, but move quickly away from that person and talk to the legitimate folks that actually have a real gripe and how to fix that. And so to listen to those, and also don't forget the positive folks, right? Don't forget your best customers, your best students that are giving you feedback over here because you focused on the negative, the loud minority. And so that's a huge thing. But it's human nature for us to focus on the negative piece when we're getting some good feedback on the positive side as well. And so at the end of the day, I'm anti-troll, so move on from the trolls, figure out how to identify those trolls, move on from them, and focus on the people that actually have some valuable critical feedback that can make your institution better.
And you know, there are some there are some people out there who do take an approach that I also like as well, where they curate comments, where folks will say, hey, look, we're going to give you the rules for coming into our house, and the rules for coming into our house are that we check you out before you come in. And, you know, if you're not going to start any problems, you're going to start any mess, and you're also not going to offend the other people who I invited into this space, then you can come in and I'll give you some room. But the minute you start doing that, I can't put you up. I can't post you up. And I think as long as you let people know that's how you're going to do it, there's some room for that, and there's some play for that.
So people are putting up some questions on Twitter, and I want to get to them in a moment. But a quick question: do you expect that your staff engage with students on social media, and why or why not?
I certainly expect that my staff does. It's just one of those spaces where students are. It's one of those spaces where young people are, and I think that it's also a way that you can, for some of them, be able to put more information out into the stream and work hard to promote it. So I don't know. I just think that I look at it in this broader sense that it's about a bit of technology in the culture. It's about the culture itself embracing a certain way about itself. And I deal in a youth culture space, and so if my staff are going to be able to talk to and engage students, they've at least got to have this fundamental understanding about social media and how to use it.
We're in a blended approach at this point, because we're really teaching people, I think, in some areas here about social media. So the expectation absolutely is, when you're looking at, you know, your departments and your activities and your programs and those areas of outreach, oh yeah, is absolutely a fundamental part of not just your marketing plan, but how you do your work. Individually and personally, we have a lot of conversations about the power this can have. So, you know, we may have residential services or Res Life who's out there actively working on things, and we've got some of the staff that are doing it. Typically the younger staff are all in, although we're fortunate enough to have a powerful director of residential life who's always on, and she's really good, and she's leading the way. But who else and how else? And so we have a lot of individual conversations about the power of this medium and the benefits that it can bring.
So Eric, I assume that you expect your staff to be on social media, right?
I do. I mean, it's been a huge boon for us. So I eat my own dog food. I practice what I preach, and so definitely, when we look at it, here's an example. So my publishers, McGraw-Hill, Wiley, awesome, you know, great big publishers, and I get a list from them. Here's all the universities that use your book. Very helpful, but they're limited that it has to go through the school's bookstore for them to get access to that data, if they get it at all. So they give me a list of 40. I go, that seems kind of light based on the chatter that I hear. So then my team, we engage with all the students to figure out when someone posts, I'm reading this for exam, blah, blah, blah. And so we're able to collect that data. Now we have a list close to 200. And it's fun, because when I Skype into classes, if they're super engaged, and all of a sudden we give them a free pizza party, and then I Skype in again during the pizza party. So definitely, I think it's one of the big advantages out there is using these tools, no matter what capacity you want to use them as.
So looking forward 10 years from now, I guess Julie and Ken in particular, do you see using digital tools as becoming an essential competency for both faculty and student affairs administrators?
I'll unequivocally say yes. And you know, we have to figure out how we're going to get there, I think, as a profession, a little bit more quickly maybe, and more intentionally than we thought about it in the past. You know, to me, I kind of liken this back to when we all stared at that Palm Pilot and went, oh my God, that's the devil. I'm never going to use that. Or when we all stared at email and went, can't I just send a memo? So it's an evolution, and we're starting to put it into job descriptions as a preferred qualification. We're starting to put that out there in rubrics when we hire folks. It's not going to be a should you, it's how do you and how effectively.
Ditto.
So I'll pass this off to you, Eric. In your books, you talk about the concepts of digital legacy and your digital stamp, but students don't often understand the benefits and consequences of their online activity. So who at the university do you think is responsible for teaching smart digital citizenship?
Everyone. And that's why I talk, whether it's university or whether it's at companies, is this is living, it's breathing, and it's a thread. It's not a channel. I hear social media channel, and that kind of like nails on a chalkboard for me when we used to use those green chalkboards. And so to me, it's like everyone has to have a play in this, because this is at their ethos. Your digital reputation is your reputation. And to understand that's not just the pitfalls. Don't teach them the pitfalls, and that's why we go over in What Happens in Vegas Stays on YouTube, that we talk about how to produce and then protect, because 86% of companies actually hire you based on something they found about you online. So I kind of call it the digital stamp paradox, is that your best protection of something going wrong is to play offense. You know, your best defense is your best offense. So the more you put out there about yourself, if something goes amiss, that's just 5% of your story. And we're all human, we're going to make mistakes. So that's just part of your story. So the short answer is everyone needs to play a role, because, again, this is about that student's digital reputation, which is a reputation.
So you put it out there, and I'll just ask each one of you, have you ever looked at someone's social media presence before you made a hire?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And have you ever not hired someone because of what they had out there?
Let's just say it got called into question, and so that became a focus of a conversation when it came down to who we were going to bring to campus and who potentially would we hire.
I've done it too, and sometimes part of the question is, and I agree with what Julie said, I've had those kinds of situations, but sometimes, depending on what the job might be, the lack of a digital presence is a concern for me. Yeah, there's some aspects of what we do in my division that I think you're a little odd if you don't have any social media presence, or if I go on to look at what you've got and everything's all puppies and family photos and nice sweaters, you know, I just don't think it's real. So I've also called people into question for certain jobs based upon a lack of decent social media presence.
You're spot on. You're spot on, and sometimes there's that lack of, and companies are starting to require their employees to get on LinkedIn because they know it's a beacon that attracts other employees. They also might, if two candidates are equal, and one has 10,000 followers on Twitter and one has 50, and the 10,000 are really engaged, they understand that that's an outlet they can use once that employee is on board. Same for universities. You're starting to see a lot of universities that are requiring their students to sign up for LinkedIn when they get on campus. One, it helps that individual student get a job after they get out of school, but also it's attracting talent to that university.
So we know our students have a short attention span, almost a Twitter-like attention span. So if you had 60 seconds to give advice to students about their social media usage, what might that be for each of you?
I'd say don't use the defaults. You don't have to use the defaults.
Good, 10 seconds. Really, really concise.
I don't know that I can beat that. That was really good. I think for me, it's don't be afraid of it, because I think we've noticed even in some of the research that's out there that students are apprehensive about using it. Even some mediums, even though they've been using others forever, because they're using it in a different way. But don't be scared of it. You know, go ahead and jump in. I love that. Don't use the defaults, and then really think about what you're putting out there.
And I would tell them, write out in one sentence or less than 140 characters. That's the limit on Twitter. What do you want people to find when they search for you on Google? And use that as kind of your digital compass. Write it out and have that front and center for everything you do, every decision you make. That'll help you.
So I have a question from Twitter. Capria Berry from NYU, in their Student Affairs program, asks, how important is the number of followers to you and/or your institution?
Number of followers, I don't think it's that important. I think it's more important about how we're using it, how we're connecting with people, and how we're engaging online. And our institution, there's no set information about how many you should have or not.
Right. I agree. Same thing. Who cares about that? How you use it. And by the way, you should be in multiple spaces too.
Agreed.
Yeah. It's really not about the follower count, it's engagement count. The one thing that followers might help on is at the beginning, and that's why some companies run promoted tweets or universities. It's kind of like the line at the club. If you see a line at the club, even though the club's empty on the inside, you're like, oh, I got to go to that club. So to get that initial start, sometimes it makes sense to kind of get some likes and some follows, because when people look at it, they go, wait, why are there 4,000 people following this person? Maybe they have something interesting to say. So that's the only reason it matters at the beginning. And then beyond that, you should not be paying for those items.
Great point.
So do any of you have digital leaders or role models that you might recommend that we could follow? Maybe a person or people who inspire you online? Other than yourselves, of course.
I was going to say Ken and Julie. And Tony.
Tony. You know, someone I think is really interesting to follow is Paul Gordon Brown. He's got a real interesting perspective on student affairs, and he shares it, and he does it in fun and interesting ways. And it's not just, okay, this is funny, it really makes you think about things. And so for other professionals, particularly in the student affairs or higher ed realm, I would encourage you to follow him.
You just made his day, Julie. Go JetBlue.
JetBlue, exactly.
You know, I find a lot of inspiration, believe it or not, in things like fashion blogs. I love places like Spy House Coffee on Instagram. I actually like looking at catalogs. So things like Pure Wow. I like looking at Refine 29. There's a woman named Eva Chen out there who I just dig. She's big into shoes. I like shoes, and I just like the way she does what she does. I like to fish around, and when I find a bit of inspiration, I'll just kind of stick with it and follow it and just go through with it for a while. But those come to mind right away.
Yeah, I like that whole idea, Ken, of, you know, you find one and then it connects you to another. That whole idea that Eric said earlier about a thread, because you can really get on these inspiration threads, and they're powerful. And I'll find myself in 45 minutes going from, you know, something that Eric put out there, and I'm clicking over onto, of course, everything goes back to BuzzFeed. It's like the Kevin Bacon of the internet. But then you go through that and you start to see these other links that are really fascinating and powerful, and I can end up on a music site listening to something that I've never heard before.
Yeah, generally inspiration
go ahead,
and cool stick together, and subversive sticks together too.
So I'm going to take another question from Higher Ed Live, Matthew Ferguson. He says social media is such a buzzword, and everyone claims to be an expert or a social media guru or social media ninja, right? Everyone thinks they're an expert. How can someone express a higher level of understanding on a resume or in an interview? You all hire folks for their social media prowess or expertise. So how does someone demonstrate more than casual usage?
I think if you were to come to me and say you're a social media guru, ninja, superstar, super person, I definitely would not hire you. You know, I want to look at what you're putting out. Show me your quality. You know, to me, I think you would be a ninja if you were able to give me, in that analog way, the same kind of verve and vibe that you would be able to show me on in the digital way. So, surefire thing. Don't tell me you're a ninja. In fact, ninjas don't say they're ninjas, and gurus don't say they're gurus.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. The other thing I would say is, don't tell me you are, show me how you use it. If you've used this to make something better on your campus, if you have used this to engage dynamically with students, that's what I want to see, and that's what I'm going to start to believe that you're good at this stuff, not just because you say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Julie. It's the show versus the tell. That's the difference in the interview room. Give them the tablet, give them the phablet, and say, show me, walk me through how do you use this stuff after hours, so that you understand that they really love it, too, that they love to be in it and using it. At Ken's point, I got sick when one of my books, the publisher put on the back, without approval, social media guru, and I just felt sick to my stomach because I actually hate that term.
Yeah, right. Like, what ninja have you ever met who someone came to you and said, you know, I'm a ninja, right? It doesn't happen that way. Or who's ever come up to you and said, I'm a guru, and I've got a certification in the back of my pocket here.
Here's my card.
I'm a guru.
I love it. So my co-host Heather Shea Gasser has been listening in, and this refers back to a comment I think Ken said a while back, and she says, "Do we go radio silent because we don't know what to say, or don't know how to say it, and so we won't wind up doing further harm?"
Well, I think that's probably a part of it. And you know what I'm going to say? That's okay, right? You know, silence is the beginning of all thought, and on some levels. And it is okay for us. You know, I think one of the things we're getting away from is learning how to live in silence. It's okay to have a little bit of isolation about yourself. It's okay to be quiet for a minute. So, yeah, part of the silence is respect, but part of the silence is I'm just not sure I've crafted what to say, or I'm not quite sure how I feel right now about this and expressing myself publicly about it. We have to allow people to be okay with that. It's like when we say to people, it's okay to say I don't know. Well, you know what? It's okay to be quiet and to reflect and to think a little bit. Pause is important.
I would 100% agree with that. And thinking about Heather's question, if you were to ask me to give you a one-word answer to that, mine would be yes. For me, it's both. It's sometimes I don't know what to say. Sometimes I need to be respectful. Sometimes I need to figure out what it is I want to say so that, again, I create the positive space, not shut down a conversation or an idea. And I think, again, in higher education, it's something we struggle with a lot. But I really like that phrase, Ken, about silence is the beginning of all thought. And if in higher education we're supposed to encourage thinking and reflecting and then acting, folks like me need to get our activator in check and try to take that pause.
Yeah. And I think if you are going to go silent, just give folks a heads up that you're not ignoring them. And so I worked at an educational company that does travel, and the volcano in Iceland exploded, so everyone was delayed, if you remember, getting back from Europe. In one company, the one that I was within, and I didn't have a decision in this, someone else did it, and so they posted, "We don't know the answer. We're trying to get through the airlines. We don't know the answer, but we'll get back to you as soon as we do." And another company just went, they didn't post anything. And so it got the vitriol on the other site went viral quickly, like, you're not responding to me. Where the other one that posted, "We don't know the answer," actually is a very positive response. And so when we do go silent, just make sure that we inform people, hey, we're really thinking through this issue. We don't know the answer yet.
Hey, you know, Eric, you're so right. We have situations around here. Sometimes it could be a disaster that's nearby, or whether or not there's a snow day. And what we try to do is coordinate with other departments on their social media accounts, especially on Twitter, to say, hey, look, everybody needs to just go quiet. Here's the official channel. And what we try to do with the official channel is to say to people, okay, we're working on it, we're thinking about it, and check back at us. We've even gone so far as to say, check back with us at this time, and we will try and give you what we've got by that time. You're absolutely right. Depending on the situation, that's an important kind of thing.
Yeah. And also understand other outlets that are providing information. So a lot of us who walk to the airport and go, follow us, follow Logan Airport on Twitter, and I go to myself, why would I ever follow an airport? And then it turns out there's good reason to follow an airport, because when the snow massively hit Boston, the airlines don't have the information, and then the Twitter handle from Boston Logan is like, we're opening runway 1, we're opening runway 2, and this is the main Delta runway, and they're sending pictures out of the massive amount of snow that's on the runway, and I go, wow, this is super helpful, and the airlines should understand there's other outlets to provide information, and so I had more information than they did, the airlines, when they had access to the same information that I did.
So I'm going to shift gears for a second and talk about the classroom and a practical question about your own leadership in meetings. So laptops and cell phones in the classroom have been a fairly controversial topic in academia. What do you think about that, and do you personally allow staff to use iPads, laptops, and cell phones in your meetings?
I do. So in both contexts, when I teach, I actually have started to incorporate laptops. So the first thing I thought to myself was, all right, if they're surfing, I might not be doing my job the way that I need to be doing my job. And I actually started to incorporate people bringing their laptops or their tablets, and I actually will do things like say, okay, someone find me an original source for this. Everybody pull your laptops out. So I've actually just decided to embrace it and to make sure that people are using it together. And look, if they still surf, they still surf. But I don't get too wigged out about that. And if I've got something super important, I make sure to say to people, hey, write this down, pull out your pen, listen to me for a moment. Meetings, people do it. Hey, look, I'm be honest with you, I'm an offender at meetings too. I at least try to put my phone underneath the desk and use it, but I slyly do it too. So I'm not going to begrudge you for doing it.
I'm the same way, almost to the letter. Use it in classrooms, use it in meetings as well, to the point where we're encouraging folks now to say, if we cannot print out agendas, we won't, because you can take your notes right there on your laptop, and it's much easier for you to organize your own thoughts that way, or mostly it's an iPad. I will own that I get a little frustrated about phone, and it really comes down to me setting that parameter that Ken just talked about. Okay, folks, I really need you to put your phone down for a minute because this is a pretty intense conversation. And then to a letter, we've got great colleagues here. They will take the phone, put it face down on the table, and then you can really engage in that very critical conversation. So, it's gone actually really well. We've also redesigned the course that I teach, which is a master's level course, to incorporate technology in very tangible ways, to the point where we did our final projects last week, and all the feedback that the classmates were giving each other was done online.
Yeah, and I love you guys, man. I gotta follow. This is great. I love all the stuff that you're saying. Agree 100%. Is that if you're in the classroom and someone's using their phone, hopefully it's because they maybe know the subject matter you're talking about already, and they're trying to look up something else, so they're constantly learning. So that's a good thing. And like Ken mentioned, if they're not paying attention to you, then you've got to reflect on how do I get them more engaged. And also understand that on an individual basis, if someone starts to fall behind, then that's an open conversation to have with that student and say, your grades are not where they should be. You've got potential. Just try for a week not being so engaged on your phone. If you're getting an A+, I wouldn't worry about you, but you're not. And so this is a step that you can use. So you have to take it to the individual level as well on that front.
So I want to respect your time. We're coming to the end of the close of our show, and I want to actually flip out and ask a question that Josie Alquist posed on Twitter, and ask you to share what is one thing you wish you knew from research that would support your digital leadership efforts?
That's a great question. I think it would be really interesting to know how you would measure this. I don't know. The impact that engagement with students actually has on their development, through the social media area. And that's a broad one. It's a really big, fat topic, and you'd have to drill down into specific elements, but not just in a classroom setting, but overall through their student kind of life cycle here at a university. How is engaging with administrators or faculty in spaces maybe outside of a classroom environment helping them develop in whatever parameter you can look at? So it could be moral development, it could be skill development, cognitive. I think that could be interesting.
I wonder if we could study whether or not what we have as media and emerging media actually facilitate gatherings and mobilization, if we can measure that.
That'd be interesting to know as well. Yeah.
And I would love to know if you're, how big of an impact your offline leadership skills have on your digital leadership skills. So I'd love to know the correlation between those, because my guess is they'd be fairly highly correlated in most instances. So it's not binary, it's both. You need to be good offline interacting with folks as well as online. And so I'd love to know that correlation.
Great point.
Well, we are near the end of our show, and all three of you, thank you so much. You did not disappoint. Great conversations back and forth. Hopefully our viewers learned a lot today, and feel free to follow up on Twitter with any questions that folks might have. I will be returning January to start off the new year with a show on the state of student affairs. And Heather Shea Gasser also has some amazing shows in the hopper, so stay tuned for updates. And be sure to subscribe to Higher Ed Live's weekly newsletter for more information. Please find me on Twitter for details of upcoming guests. Until then, my name is Tony Duty. I hope the new year brings you peace, joy, and laughter. And thanks again for watching, folks. Take care.